Welcome to World News Update. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. In a landmark decision that will have far-reaching consequences for the U.S. economy and global trade, the Supreme Court has struck down the Trump administration's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to impose sweeping tariffs. This ruling marks a pivotal moment in the ongoing debate over the limits of presidential authority in economic matters. The court ruled that only Congress, not the president, can set tariffs, a power rooted in the Constitution and designed to ensure that no single branch of government can unilaterally control the nation's trade policy. This decision reasserts the fundamental principle of separation of powers, reminding Americans that the authority to tax and regulate commerce lies squarely with their elected representatives. This verdict ends years of legal and political conflict over who controls American trade policy. For years, presidents have used emergency powers to bypass Congress and impose tariffs, often sparking controversy and uncertainty for businesses and trading partners alike. Now, the Supreme Court has clarified that such sweeping actions require congressional approval. For businesses and consumers, this ruling promises more stability and predictability in the marketplace. Companies that rely on imported goods can now plan with greater confidence, knowing that sudden tariff hikes are less likely. Consumers, too, may benefit from lower prices on everyday products as the threat of abrupt trade disruptions recedes. America's trading partners, like China and the European Union, see this as a return to predictable rules-based trade. International diplomats have welcomed the decision, hoping it will lead to more stable negotiations and fewer trade wars. The ruling signals that the U.S. is recommitting to the global trading system and honoring its agreements. The era of sudden unilateral tariffs is over. Instead, any major changes to trade policy will require open debate and approval by Congress, making the process more transparent and accountable to the American people. Ultimately, the Supreme Court's decision reaffirms the system of checks and balances at the heart of American democracy, ensuring that Congress, not the president, holds the power to tax and regulate commerce and shaping the future of U.S. trade for years to come. The legal fight over Trump's tariffs began in lower courts, sparking a heated debate that would ripple through the judicial system. The central issue was whether the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, allowed the president to impose tariffs without the explicit approval of Congress. This question was not just a matter of legal interpretation, but also of constitutional principles. Opponents of the tariffs argued vehemently that this move represented a significant constitutional overreach. They contended that the power to regulate trade and raise revenue is a fundamental responsibility of Congress, not the executive branch. The Federal Circuit Court ultimately sided against the Trump administration. The judges stated that IEEPA was never intended to grant such sweeping powers to the president, emphasizing the importance of maintaining a balance of power. In response, the Trump administration appealed the decision, arguing that the president needed the flexibility to act swiftly in order to protect American industries during emergencies. They claimed that such authority was crucial for national security and economic stability. The case eventually made its way to the Supreme Court, where the justices faced a fundamental question: who truly controls trade policy in the United States? Is it the president, who can act quickly in times of crisis, or Congress, which has the constitutional mandate to regulate commerce? The Supreme Court's ruling would not only resolve this immediate conflict, but also set a precedent that would define the limits of presidential authority in international economics for decades to come. The decision would have far-reaching implications for the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches. President Trump defended the tariffs as essential for national strength, arguing they corrected decades of unfair trade practices that had left the American economy vulnerable. He emphasized that these tariffs were not just a temporary measure, but a necessary step to rebuild the nation's industrial base and ensure long-term economic stability. Trump claimed that the tariffs revived American manufacturing, bringing back jobs that had been lost to overseas competition. He argued that only bold and decisive action could protect U.S. jobs and national security, warning that removing these tariffs would risk economic disaster and further job losses. The administration insisted that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, gave the president broad power to act swiftly in emergencies, including imposing tariffs. This legal framework was presented as a crucial tool for responding to economic threats and ensuring the country's financial independence. Supporters of the tariffs saw this as a fight for economic independence and a strategic move to counter global competitors like China. They believed that by imposing tariffs, the U.S. could level the playing field and protect its industries from unfair foreign practices. Trump's promise of generating trillions in tariff revenue resonated deeply with those who had been hurt by globalization. Many saw it as a way to reclaim economic sovereignty and rebuild communities that had been devastated by factory closures and job losses. The defense of these tariffs rested on the need for extraordinary presidential powers in extraordinary times. The administration argued that in a rapidly changing global economy, the president must have the authority to take swift and decisive action to protect the nation's interests. Opponents of the tariffs, including business groups and legal scholars, argued the president had overstepped constitutional bounds. They said IEEPA was meant for targeted sanctions, not broad tariffs, and that only Congress can levy taxes. Evidence showed tariffs raise costs for American companies and consumers, hurting competitiveness and triggering retaliation abroad. The Supreme Court's decision was hailed as a victory for constitutional order and economic stability. It reaffirmed that far-reaching trade decisions belong to Congress, not the president. The ruling restored a crucial separation of powers. The end of IEEPA tariffs means lower prices for consumers and more stability for businesses relying on imports. Companies can now plan investments without fear of sudden tariff hikes. Internationally, the decision signals a shift back to cooperative, rules-based trade, easing tensions with China and the EU. While some tariffs remain, this is the biggest trade policy change in years. America's trading partners see the U.S. recommitting to global norms. The move rebalances power toward Congress and away from unilateral executive action. The world is watching how the U.S. will rebuild trade relationships and redefine its global role. With the Supreme Court's ruling, the U.S. faces a new economic landscape. The government and businesses must now unwind years of tariff-driven supply chain changes. Some industries will face renewed competition, while others benefit from lower costs. Trade policy will shift back to Congress, requiring more debate and compromise. The president will need to rely more on diplomacy and alliances. This decision marks a return to constitutional principles and multilateral negotiation. How America manages this transition will shape its economic future and global standing.